What I want to say first is I want to create a picture really of what Ludham was like between 1936 and 1945, because that's the span of the letters we've had. And it wasn't like it is today. There were some things that were still familiar when I'm reading the letters, but we have to remember there were lots of aeroplanes going in and out of an airfield. There were lots of aeroplanes going over the village, and then some of those aeroplanes were enemy aeroplanes as well, and things were being dropped. There were lots of pilots in the village, and those pilots were not just English pilots. It was cosmopolitan. There were Polish, Czech, Canadian, American, as well as English. So we had a right mix of people within the village. And it was a noisy village. Here we've got the wall here. That was on the airfield. It's not there anymore. The farmer decided he didn't want it anymore, so he knocked it down. That's where they tested the machine guns from the aircraft against that wall. So quite noisy at times. We've got our own little Dad's Army up here as well. That's the Home Guard. All those people, those men are Ludham men. And if you go into the website, the Ludham website, you'll come across that picture, and you'll come across the name of every single one of those people. You just don't have to look for it. And of course the Home Guard had to be on duty sometimes. They'd be down at Ludham Bridge, because the bridge was important. If the Germans invaded, they could get over the river by the bridge. So there were guards on duty there, as well as guns in placement. And there is evidence of that at Ludham Bridge still, if you go down and have a look. And everywhere we come across Nissen huts. They had to put the army somewhere. They had to give them accommodation. So there were lots of Nissen huts about. And if you also go into the archive and read some of the accounts by Beulah Gowing, they are very colourful accounts, because her parents owned the pub, ran the pub in the village, and that's where a lot of the servicemen went, and they had a right good time, I believe, in the pub. So it's worth looking on the archive to read some of the memoirs of various people that were here during the war. Right, let's just go on to the next one. I'm next going to go on to the letters. These aren't the actual letters, but they looked a bit like that. The letters were difficult, weren't they, Kathy?
They were.
They were. They were written on all sorts of paper. Some of them were in green, some of them were faded. It was small writing. Mr. Goody sometimes forgot to cross his T's. And you sort of came across a word and you think, what the hell's this? And then you sort of realise, oh God, he hasn't crossed any T's in that word, has it? And it would suddenly dawn on you what it would be. So Kathy and I transcribed them. If you were going to transcribe something for a museum, you would go through a lot of red tape. There are a lot of do's and a lot of don'ts when you transcribe for a museum. I'm afraid Kathy and I did not follow any of those rules. We just typed what we thought we could see. Now, a lot of you might have come across documents before that have been transcribed, and the transcriber hasn't quite got it right, and you come across something that actually doesn't make sense. Well, I hope we made sense of the letters. I did say to Nigel, I've been reading through them because I've kept copies of everything on my computer, and I'm beginning to realise I'm not a very good typist. I've got the odd mistake here and there that is me, not the actual person that wrote them. So we'll see how we get on. Right, let's go to the next one, please. Now, this is a copy. Now, Christina got this up. I've got this off the archive. 1939 England and Wales Register. There were not many records kept during the war. But on here, you can see there's an arrow at the far side. There, oh, right, thanks, John. That is pointing to Crossways, and I've given their details at the top so you can read it easier. Crossways, Thomas C. Goody, born 18th of March 1870. It states he's an architect and surveyor. And then Phyllis Goody, born 28th of October 1878, unpaid domestic duties. They should say housewife.
I was going to say that means housewife, doesn't it? But she just said so, yeah.
Unpaid domestic duties down here.
Look at that one there, it says paid domestic.
That's obviously a maid.
That wasn't a housewife. That was somebody employed. And Crossways is the name of the house, well, bungalow, okay, that they lived in. And it is their letters that we're looking at tonight. And we do have evidence of where they lived before they came here. Because in 1936, some of the letters had actually got some headings from their previous place where they lived. And we've even got Bexley Heath, I think it's 691, it's not quite on, architect and surveyor. They lived at Rodwell, Churchfield Road, Welling, Kent. That's where they came from. And I'm not quite sure of the actual date in which they moved into Crossways, and I don't know who lived there before them. I have the feeling it was somebody called Hall, which you will see later on in one of the letters. It refers to those people a little. And let's go on to the next one.
Could I just mention, Crossways, it's down the Norwich Road,
Yeah,
is on the corner of...
Yeah, I'm coming to that.
Just going anti-clockwise.
Right, now, here I've tried to list some of the people living around them at the time, in 1939. You may recognise house names. Certainly down here we've got Alma Cottages and Vicarage there, and Crossways came between Hillcrest and Haven. And a variety of families living along the Norwich Road, but I do know that from where they lived, they could actually see the village hall. So there weren't many houses along there, were there? So that's quite interesting, just to see some names. Gravenel, we know that name, don't we? Slaughter,
Perhaps.
we know that name. Are there any others? Does anybody recognise this? I think.
Newton, surely. Still got Newtons around.
Yes, yeah.
John
Oh, we've got
White.
here Paul.
Yeah.
His name crops up somewhere
That's tickled
in
me.
the letters. And the bottom, the vicar. At the bottom. Right, let's go on to the next one. Because this is going to show you where Crossways is if you're not too sure. I have the pictures here are on the side are modern pictures. They're not taken in 1939. I couldn't find any, but they just give you an idea. Right, the blue box is Crossways, and it's at the corner of Norwich Road and Lovers Lane.
That's currently
Okay.
to rent, isn't it?
Sorry?
Yes, it is.
Currently to rent.
Yes.
It's currently,
Yes.
currently yeah, to rent.
Yeah.
And all the hedges being chopped down,
Yes.
hasn't it?
It's got
Now, yes. There are some pine trees there, and in the letters it does mention Mr. Goody planting pine trees. So whether they're those, I don't know. Right. Another house that's mentioned a lot in the letters is Brayside. Now, Brayside is now Bancora Lodge, and it's the big white house on the corner of Pound Lane and Norwich Road. Okay, right opposite to Crossways. The other thing is, Pound Lane during the war was called Brayside, not Pound Lane. But it was spelt different to the Brayside spelt in the letters. Don't ask me why, I don't know. We've got lots of little boxes around. All the little boxes you can see here, or around there. Nissen huts. That's where the army were. So all those that are in this field, which probably will eventually be estate, new estate. They are the actual billets for the soldiers. Number 6, can you go to number 6, John?
No.
There is the armoury. If we go up to number 5, up there, we're in the mess hall. If we go up to 4, we're in the cookhouse. Okay. And if we come across, I think it's number that one there, sewage works. So that's
Willow Way.
part of Willow Way, sewage works. Right. Now, if we go over to number 3, John, by the church, by the school area, there, number 3, that's the NAFI and the cinema. And the people of Ludham used to go along to the cinema. They weren't very interesting films, though, from what I gather. And if we go right to the top, to number 1, right at the top, John, there.
Yeah, I'm coming there.
That's the motor transport. That's all to do with motor transport.
Yeah, I know.
And that's
I just
the I won't say tin hut. Corrugated building that's there now. Something's being done to it, isn't it? And all these men down here had to go to number 2 next to it for their ablutions, which seems a bit weird, having to go all the way up there when they're down here, but that's the army for you. So that gives you a little idea of the layout around the Crossways bungalow area. There are no houses, unfortunately, in this map, which I think Nigel drew. Did you draw?
Yes, I did try. Yeah,
Yeah.
there weren't any.
Well, there must have been some, because we've got evidence of people from the 1939.
Yeah, they were a bit further up Norwich Road, I think.
Yes, I think so.
And the police
Yeah.
house.
Yeah.
The remains of the ablutions are still there.
Yes, I was going to say I thought they were. Yes. And what sort of state are they in?
Full of leaves.
Full of leaves. Right, lovely. Okay, so this is where the letters were coming from. The couple that lived here at Crossways. Okay, Mara? And these are the Crossway letters. So you can see they're quite small. They look very neat in a way, but they did come on different types of paper. Some quite good quality paper and some rubbish. Mrs. Goody liked to write in green, and she always wrote Dear Babs, and Mr. Goody always said Dear Billy. So for a long time I was assuming these were 2 different people, but I don't think they were, in actual fact, 2 different people. I think they were the same person. The parents just called them differently. Okay. Right. What were Mr. and Mrs. Goody actually like? Well, from the letters, they're nice people. They are friendly. They're committed to the village. As a retired architect and surveyor, he's quite good at DIY and keeping the house in order and the garden in order and things like that. Avid bridge players. Any excuse to go out to friends to play bridge or have friends in to play bridge, it's in nearly every letter. And Mr. Goody didn't like to lose. Very family orientated, because the letters that they wrote were written by Mr. Goody particularly every day. He didn't post every day, he did it like a diary through the week, so that one letter contained several different days and it was all dated as per the day. And he wrote about the most tedious things you could think of sometimes, didn't he, Kathy? Yes. Oh dear. Right, they were champions of good causes, Mrs. Goody in particular, because during the war they had to raise quite a lot of money for the forces, for refugees, prisoners of war even, all sorts of things. She did her knitting for, mainly knitting that she did, and she gathered the ladies of Ludham round her to do the knitting. They were avid readers. They read most days for an hour or so, and the library books were delivered to them, which I thought quite surprising really in the war. And I presume, you know, they handed back the books they'd read and then got some fresh ones. Gardeners. Every letter, there is something about what they're doing in the garden. And I'll come on to that later on and show you sort of what they had in their garden. But it was very industrious in all weathers out in the garden. Very much committed churchgoers. You will find I only mention St Catherine's. So apologies to those of the Methodist chapel. It doesn't seem to come into their letters because St Catherine's was the place that they went to, and they were very much into the life of that church. And of course they were thrifty. They did bargain with other people and barter and whatever, their vegetables and their fruit and whatever. And the whole village tended to help each other out. Well, I think a little of that goes on nowadays. I mean, in broad reaches, people are handing out things from their gardens, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yes.
if we have too many.
So, some of this is sort of like today, but these people were busy people. They didn't sit around and loll about. Occasionally, Mr. Goody would have a morning in bed, and occasionally Mrs. Goody, who was not always well, had an extra hour or two in bed, but generally speaking they were very busy. Right.
Did you get any idea of how old they were?
Yes.
70.
Mr. Goody was about 69 in 39, and Mrs. Goody was about 62.
Thank you.
Right, St Catherine's Church. We'll have a little talk about the church life at the time, because there were two vicars that were mentioned in the letters. Now, the first one is the Reverend Edward Blacksley. Why do vicars have to have such complicated names?
Because it makes them stand out.
And he was here 1937 to 43, so he wasn't here all of the war. He was known as Ted, okay, in the letters, and his wife was Reen, short for Irene. Rev Ted was an old contemptible. He'd served in the Royal Navy during the Great War, so he was used to having the services around and the army, and he got on quite well with them. Our letter writers were good friends with Ted and Reen. They went to the vicarage. Guess what for?
Tea.
Bridge.
Bridge.
And plants.
And plants. And Ted, because Reen was often quite busy. and Ted, after the services on a Sunday, would come for Sunday lunch with them at Crossways. But he always managed to find for them a joint of meat. Not quite sure where he found it, but he often brought a joint of mutton. Now, we don't hear about mutton, do we, much nowadays? But he always supplied the main part of the meal for them. Now, I've got a letter here that was written by, I think this was Mr. Goody. I'll read it through, you can follow me. I must confess that I could not find much fault at the bell ringing on Sunday. Our bell ringers have been somewhat depleted, and the RAF filled up, and as you might expect, things were a bit shaky, but somewhat better as they went on. So obviously the bells were ringing well during the war. A lovely sunny morning, and the church was packed. Quite a lot of Air Force in addition to soldiers, but we saw no sign of the choir we were told about, and Ted even had the lessons to read himself. There were a good number of Ludham people there, and the boardmans in force. We met Ted outside about 4 minutes to 11, and he greeted us. No blinking organist. But anyhow, Miss G turned up in time. Now, Miss G is a Miss Grimes. I don't know much about it, except way back, Grimes were at the pub, I think, down at St Bennett's, the Grimes family. They're connected with the pub there at some stage or other. But whether it's the same family, I don't know.
I don't know that.
No.
What was the date of that letter? Do you know?
Sorry?
Do you know the date of that letter?
That letter is 1943.
You see, my memory is that bell ringing was banned during the war.
Obviously not in London.
Obviously not. Certainly where I lived, it was known as if the church bells rang, there was an invasion.
Yes. But obviously they're hearing the bells ringing here. So they're very laid back in Ludham. The letters give that impression of being quite laid back about the war.
I'm just wondering whether the lady's name was actually pronounced Reenie, because I had an auntie who was called Reenie.
Yes.
Oh, Reenie, right, okay, I'll call her Reenie then, okay. I think, what was I just going to say something?
Sorry.
It's all right. No, I've gone to it. Carry on, let's carry on. Okay. One or two comments about the church and what went on in the church.
I did that picture from, did you know?
That's off the archive.
Not this one, the other one.
Your painting?
I did that picture.
Oh, you did that picture, did you?
Yeah.
I knew it was somebody in the village that had done
I
it.
did it.
Oh, right,
I
Cathy
usually
did
done
that.
it.
The pencil drawing. Yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Right. There was a full church, mainly soldiers, of course, and a good sprinkling of officers. So they're not allowed to dodge church parade. We sat just behind officers who all joined in the service. One, a major, sang out lustily, and generally the singing was much heartier than when the Shropshires were here. Oh. But you could hear some were shouting rather than singing. We both went to church at 11 a.m, but as we had to sit almost at the back of the south aisle, we heard very little of Ted's discourse. There were soldiers almost to the full extent of the church, and some Air Force men who came in late had to sit in the choir stalls in the chancel. So the church is a very, very busy place during the war, and obviously troops do have to go to, are encouraged to go to church, and probably were forced to go to church. I don't know. Next one, please. Right, now, this is Reenie in October 43. And it's Mrs. Goody writing to her daughter. Reenie also had a momentous announcement that Ted had got another living. He's going to Ugborough in Devon, about 12 miles east of Plymouth. You'll find it in the map book. He may get away this year, but will go as soon as he can get away. Lucky to get a job in such a delightful situation. The sea is visible from the vicarage, which is an up-to-date house, all electric, mains water, and a smaller garden, which is being looked after until they get there. So, this vicar is on the move. Why did he want? He asked, I think, to move. Why? Because he quite enjoyed the life here, but he couldn't stand the cold north wind. He found it far too cold. He wanted to go somewhere where it would be a bit warmer. So he ended up down in Devon. Lucky man. Right, here we go. Right, we come on to the next vicar that takes over. Another one with a name. Hubert Walter Howell Ainsworth. He was here 10 years or more, 1944, 1955. He was, from what I can gather, and I may be wrong, a devout but rather austere person, making him a sharp contrast to the previous vicar. He was one in charge of the Thanksgiving for VE Day, May 45, and VJ Day in August 45. And they have quite a lot to say about him. This is Mrs. Goody. The new man, H. Ainsworth, decided on Thursday to accept the living. They have no family, and as they told Mrs. B, are very, and I couldn't read the word, that's why there's a gap, people with no encumbrances and will find the stipend sufficient. They want to stay put when they get here. He said there would be no question of wanting to go on to something better. Oh, I wonder how it will all turn out. So there's a little bit of suggestion here that things aren't going to be quite as easy going with this vicar. And occasionally in the letters we did come across words that we just couldn't make out. So we just had to leave gaps for those words. That's why you've got dots every so often. Mrs. B, I think, is a Mrs. Broom. But I don't know anything about her. But in the letters, lots of names are abbreviated or just the first letter of the name. So it was very difficult to know exactly who they were talking about. Next one, please. Right, here we go. The new man does not intend to let the grass grow, for he's moving in next Tuesday, and next Sunday he will be on duty. 8 a.m, 11 a.m, and 6 p.m. The following Wednesday, 6 a.m, an evening service, and Friday evening service. What about that? I'm afraid you'll have a rude awakening. I can't see many going to church twice during this week unless it's Miss B and Mrs. Brown. Mrs. Brown? Any clues as to who she is?
Is that
Dr. Brown?
Nita? Is that Nita?
This is his wife, Mrs.
Oh,
Brown.
Mrs.
So it's the doctor. Dr. Brown's is, will have been in the village a very long time. And she's quite a regular churchgoer. Poor Daphne had a grievance. The new vicar will not allow them the use of the tennis ground. And last year, she said they all carried pails of sand in the autumn to dress it ready for the season. It looks as if he will make himself very unpopular if he goes on like that, for he is so different to Evans, who would go out of his way to make things right. This does not bode very well for Mr. Ainsworth, does it? Really. But anyway, it gives you a flavour of sort of what's going on at the time. Right. Now, you heard me mention Shropshire's in one of the previous letters. That's the KSLI. That's all they did in the letters, was to write the words KSI. And to start with, I thought, what the hell's that mean? But it's actually the King's Shropshire Light Infantry, and they were in Ludham 39, 40, around that time. The gentleman on the far side is in dress uniform, and there's a group of them in a slightly more relaxed mode, shall we say. But I don't think Mr. Goody thought that highly of them, so I don't know what they got up to around the village. And here, he's writing here, Friday and Sat, we were inundated by American soldiers doing work on telegraph poles all along the road. They were a noisy lot, and very different to the Canadians, very superior. And we English are poor fry, but then I expect by now they think they're winning the war. I must say, they seem to have some fine clothing there working. Suits were very swell, and shirts better looking than our officers. So not a totally good impression of the Americans here, but the Canadians obviously were a quieter lot. So whether the whole village felt like this, I don't know. I don't think the whole village did somehow. Right, next one. Right, now this is a typical letter across there, and I put it up because this person is mentioned in it. She is here, mentioned here. Miss Vidler. Miss Vidler didn't come from Ludham. She came here for the war with two of her daughters, her younger daughters, and she was at Hall Farm, and she was in charge, she was the warden of the Women's Land Army Hostel. So if the land girls were not billeted on the farms where they were working, this is where they would have been in this area at Hall Farm. And she stayed for most of the war, but I think towards the end of the war she got a bit fed up. I think the girls played her up a little bit sometimes. And she did leave eventually. But she did drop in once or twice to see Crossways with requests for things. And she looks quite official, doesn't she, in her uniform, really. But we do have a lot of inquiries. We have an inquiry on the archive, I think from a granddaughter, who mentions her grandmother, Mrs. Vidler, and the fact that she was here in Ludham. So, you know, if you've got the archive, you can actually look her up and see a little bit more information about her. Right, we'll carry on. Now, occasionally, not often, the couple would either go to Norwich or they would go to Great Yarmouth. More often to Great Yarmouth. They used to catch the bus to go to Great Yarmouth. And quite often they were a bit disgruntled because it was so busy and there were not many seats on the bus. And sometimes there were soldiers on the bus taking up the seats. So, but this time it's Mr. Goody on his own. He goes to Great Yarmouth because he wants to buy some +4s. So that's giving us a idea of the age and what people are wearing, doesn't it? And it's a bit sad, really. Yarmouth doesn't seem much altered since I was there last. It's very depressing to wander through the town. I don't think it's changed a lot. But we have to remember that Yarmouth had been bombed at some stage, so that there were bomb sites around. And I eventually made my way to the front. The promenade is open to the public, but the foreshore is all barbed wire and mines. So the beaches at Great Yarmouth, one could not walk on the beaches at all. I couldn't find a photograph of the beaches at Great Yarmouth during the war. I just couldn't seem to find one. But I've given you two photographs of, along our coastline, things that were done to the beaches. I mean, there were fences put up. You come across these things every so often, very big concrete blocks.
Dragon's teeth, they call them, didn't they?
Right.
Question for
Well, a lot of those. Yes.
Is the barbed wire to keep us in or to keep people out?
I think they just tried anything, didn't they, to keep anybody off or anything off. These are soldiers, I would think, there, putting things in place. And on this bottom one, you can see danger, mines. So one does hope that they have cleared all the mines along our beaches. He goes on to say, the air was lovely and fresh and blowing offshore, and I found a shelter from the wind and in the sun, and sat a while and watched the space where people should have been, had it been August bank holiday. What a difference. It was not very exciting sitting there. The only occupation I could find was to sharpen the contents of a waistcoat pocket. 3 short lengths of black lead. I mean, we all do that, don't we? Go sit on the beach and sharpen our pencils. There were a few stray machines passing over, and people seemed to sit up and take notice in case they looked suspicious. By machines, he's meaning aeroplanes. He never ever mentions aeroplanes, it's always machines that he mentions. So it gives you an idea that, okay, it might be nice to sit in the sun, but you're still aware of noises above, because you know the sound of a Spitfire, you know the sound of a German aircraft, and you'd run for it if you heard anything you didn't like. Right, thank you. Right, this might be a bit dark. I'm hoping that you can see it. The skies around here were lit up, and Mr. Goody refers to them as fireworks. That's lovely, very laid back. There was considerable activity in the air during the evening, plenty of gunfire, but I didn't distinguish much bombing. So they're well in tune with what's going on around them, even if they're sitting in front of the fire in the house. Flares were plentiful and extended from a little east of Norwich to the Yarmouth direction. After the first do, there was a lull, and about 9 they came again. The land before supper was somewhat disturbed, otherwise there'd been some bombing. But fortunately, all the disturbance was well away from here. I watched the fireworks for a short time from Mattock's front door. One flare was no sooner discharged than shells began to burst about it, but they lit up and dangled in the air in the direction of Yarmouth. So, quite a sight, really, in a way, because they were not near. If they'd have been a bit nearer, they'd have been a bit scared, more scared. As it was a bright moonlight night, I did not bother to take a torch. They'd gone over to Mattock's. But coming home, M, that's Mrs. Goody, always referred to as M in the letters. thought of the personnel bombs and borrowed a torch to show us the ground to be walked over. So they're beginning to be a little bit conscious of what might be around and what could be dangerous. And we're going to come on to a lot more bombing in a minute. If you'd like to go to the next. Yeah.
Was M for mother?
Probably.
Mama.
Mom.
Mama. Yeah. Right. Ludham has at last had a packet of 6 bombs. And not one single person hurt. Only one of England's horses in the shed at the corner of Lovers Lane. There must have been some stables at the top of Lovers Lane somewhere. So badly injured, it had to be shot. One bomb fell just outside the shed. Luckily, the bombs seem to have been small. I suppose the crater was about 8 foot, but we found it all filled in when daylight came this morning. I don't know. Then the army must very quickly have filled things in and dealt with it. I don't know. Next one. Right, now, this is, for them, a little bit more shocking. This is Mr. writing. M has written to you about today's exciting event. She was preparing a bath, and I was sitting facing the fire in the dining room when I heard a plane diving, accompanied by a shrill whistle, and before I realised it, there was a terrific crack, followed at short interval by 2 others. The first struck the hard road, but the others fell on cultivated land. It was some job to go round and try to find out what sashes were dislocated, that's the windows, and in the dining room was so full of smoke and soot that I wondered if anything was on fire, but not so, as I found after investigating the roof. It was a bit of a turmoil. But we settled down to read for a while before going to bed. Fortunately, we both had a good night's rest. This is just incredible. You know, this is going on around them and the house nearly falling down around them and they're going to bed. They're having a good night's sleep. The structure of the garage did not appear to be affected, but the contents of the shelves were scattered all over the place and many things hanging up were shaken down, so there's a good deal to do to store things away. No, the bomb did, well, we'll see whether it actually hit the house or not. Next one, my love. Right, here's the fire. He's sitting in front of the fire. Of course, we on Brayside, that's the White House across the road, got a good shake-up. About half the tiles off here, and Skillen and Dale are at present working on the roof. Something hit the dining room chimney. You can imagine the condition of the dining room. Pa was sitting in front of the fire and luckily was not touched, although bits came well into the room and as far as soot. I had to wash the rug. So that's Mr. in front of the fire during this particular bombing. Thank you. Now, I was just about to have a bath. This was about 8 p.m. And as the water was a bit short, I did a little pumping, which means they're not on mains water supply here. Just as I finished, crash! I thought the whole place was coming down. Had I been in the bath, I should have had a shock. The part of the ceiling came down in the B room, the bathroom. So I think they had a lucky escape here, really. Right, we've got to 8 o'clock. Shall we stop? Have a drink, bit of a natter, and I'll carry on with what else happened with the bombing after the break. Okay? Right, we're going to carry on from... No, can you go just back? Can I just point out, this is not the actual bathroom. It is a 1940s style bathroom, but it's not the actual one that was in the house, in the bungalow. I have no photographs for that. Right, okay. Right, there were lots of letters to family about what had been happening with these 6 bombs and things. So we'll just go through that. And this is, I think, Mr. Goody writing. Well, we then went round to assess the damage after a short interlude in the Morrison. I'll give you an example of a Morrison, what it looked like. Where they had theirs, I don't know, where it was in the house, until the guns ceased. So they did actually go somewhere where they thought they would be a little bit safer whilst they could hear guns going on. The front door is jammed. The whole of the framework, including the side windows, is out of place. It's a wonder it didn't fall. The lead light panel is out, and there's a hole in the woodwork at the top where pieces of bomb splinter came in. I did not find this until we were going to bed. Windows broken, a piece nearly out of the carpet on the floor, and the chest damaged. And Mrs. Goody, my leather pochette, which I laid there when we came in from church, has a small piece absolutely embedded in the leather. Evidently, I did not finish the decoration properly when I made it. They are all very sort of jokey about things, you know, make light of things. All this was the worst. One pane only cracked in the dining room and a fastening blown off one of our bedroom windows. I peeked in the larder, in fear and trembling, but not a thing had moved. I had visions of mixed jam. Well, you could imagine, couldn't you? I mean, larders in those days were very full of bottled fruit and jams and all sorts of things. If that had got sort of messed about, it would have been a bit of a mess, really.
A bit of a pickle.
A bit of a pickle, yes. All over the floor. Right, on we go. Now this is Brayside, the house opposite, the big white house that's there, which has lovely Christmas decorations usually in the front garden, but it does have trees at the front, which you can't see quite a lot of it. At Brayside, 7 of their windows are shattered. Both their bedrooms, dining room, drawing room, kitchen, scullery. Broken glass everywhere, and worse still, the sashes are badly smashed. A good thing the glass was all outside, and only a few splinters in. Now that surprises me. I would have thought it would have all blown in, and it seems to have blown out.
It gets sucked, I think, by the pressure, with the difference of pressure.
Yes, yeah. Another bomb fell outside the village hall. One in the back garden of the council houses, and I cannot tell exactly where the other 3 fell, but all within a very small area. Isn't it marvellous that no one was hurt? Of course, it made a fine mess of all the wires at the corner by the crossways gates. Men have been working here all day. Well, we both took things very quietly, had some supper, listened to the news at 9 o'clock, and settled down to a quiet read for about an hour and a half. So they don't cease from doing what they normally do, even if it's chaos around them. Okay. Right, we've seen this picture before. And stirring times in Ludham today. It was a dull morning. but in the afternoon became bright and sunny with a good deal of flying, so a lot of aircraft in the sky. I was having my afternoon siesta, this is Mrs. when M came into the dining room to bring to my notice a huge pile of black smoke rising up in the line of Hall's chimneys. Well, Hall's is a name that was in that list of people living somewhere on the Norwich Road. Saw at the beginning.
cottages.
Down by the cottages.
Yeah, that's Sale Hall.
Yeah. It seemed to me that it was from the southern part of the ground, but later on, Dale told M that it was a solo machine that had come down in the narrow opening between Throwers and England's shops. M went up to have a look at it, but I didn't go at once. Sally, this is Sally Mattox. Sally brought back a pair of steps she'd borrowed and gave me more details, so I thought I'd go to see. So he couldn't resist, really. Okay. I met M coming back and carried on. There was a mess in the street. Burnt out parts had been taken off Thrower's roof, and a fine collection of mangled metal nearly across the road, with the usual collection of children. And we've heard Mike Fuller talk about this, him being actually there. Where I've lost my place.
Third line.
Third line. Oh yeah, collection of children and other sightseers, and a cordon of Air Force men to keep off unauthorised people from getting mixed up with the wreckage. Both walls were steaming, and some of England's sheds had been burned, and the fire had spread to the inside of Throwers. The latter has lost some valuables from the bedroom. Someone thought they had a good right to them. Now, I'm not quite sure what he's getting at there. Seems a bit near the mark, doesn't it?
It was some other guy, it wasn't me.
The machine carried away a bit of a corrugated roof of England's and apparently struck Thrower's flank wall. Fortunately, no one was hurt except the pilot, who was slightly hurt on the side of the head and ribs. Now, we know from other people's writings that the pilot's foot was stuck, and they went away to get a saw because they thought they were going to have to saw his foot off, but he managed to get it out in time. And we've got that story in the archive. The tale is that he was coming back from Kiel and had only 3 gallons of juice left. So that's his version of what happened on that day, but you will find other slightly different versions on the archive. Thank you. And there are various people that actually came to the rescue of the pilot. Russell Brooks, Iris Kemp, Clifford Lamble, Stephen Malon, Alfred Osborne, James Russell, Cyril Thrower, Robert Wilson and Ina Wise received a commendation from King George VI for their courage in rescuing Jim from the burning wreckage of his aircraft. So people were recognised for their bravery in trying to help this pilot. Okay. Right, with a few comments about some of the personnel that were around. The new CO is a tall, big man. We wonder who he is. His name is Corbett. We also hear there is a millionaire Major Wills by name. Good stuff, tobacco and cigarettes. So I expect we shall see plenty of hobnobbing in Ludham. And I don't know how to pronounce this. Miss Hackon? Haycon?
It is April.
Told me yesterday that accommodation was wanted in the village for 24 wives. What hopes! But it seems so far none of the men are being billeted. I don't know whether we shall eventually find ourselves glad to have a wife here, but my leg will have to be better at least before we can think of that. So I don't think they're very anxious to have people stay in their bungalow. Right. It's a lovely morning, but such a cold wind. This is what's driven the vicar away. The first thing I heard was a lot of shoveling out in the front. And when I went to look, I found the kitchen gate entrance half blocked with ballast and electric conduits, and later on a gang of men were breaking up the road with a barrier of umpteen red flags round them. They are air ministry men, and it looks as though it's in connection with the landing lights. But the work is only just started, and I can't diagnose the operations yet. That's Mr. Goodyear writing there. So lots of activity going on all around them. Thank you. Right, being friendly with the troops. Yesterday morning, a party consisting of Mrs. Adcock, Matt and Jeff, Mrs. England, Mrs. Smallwood, and one or two others were escorted round the camp to various huts where the men were ready with holy socks, etc. And the time fixed for this little do was 12 p.m. Sat. I heard all about it from one or two on Saturday afternoon, as you may guess. And as one person said, oh yes, some of them will do anything to run after the off. That's the officers. So, lots of things going on in the village with the troops, I think. Next one. Mrs. Horner of Throwers and Paper. I'm not quite sure what she means, what they mean by throwers, yes, and papers. I'm not quite sure. But it's the post office, don't know. Had another spill this afternoon just outside the officer's mess and near to her last bicycle affair. But she was not much hurt and was on duty again on Saturday. I went to Throwers just before having my tea and saw her lying in the road. But as there were 5 officers here, I thought it best not to interfere. Apparently she came into collision with one of the officers coming out as she was riding past on her bike. Lots of innuendo here. Dear me. Right. Okay. Oh, we're back to the bathroom. The bathroom. We had a soldier visit us this evening for a bath. He had been scrounging round, and Mrs. Allard advised him to try here. He took about an hour over it and had coffee and cake and biscuits whilst listening to the 9 p.m. news and a resume of Churchill's speech in the Commons. Foster is his name, a private. He went off just before 10 o'clock. So obviously the soldiers don't think much of their ablutions and are trying to scrounge the odd bath here and there. Anyway, it's a good job they've got water, hot water and whatever for him, I suppose. Right, there we go. I did mention, just quick, that they did a lot of reading. These are some of the types of books that they were reading at that time. The Worst Viper, The House with the Blue Door, Fear Comes to Chalfont, and Celia's House. And he talks about these books in the letters to his daughter, recommending some of them and others not quite so good. But I mean, every day they do have a session where they sit by the fire and read. This is the sort of literature of the time that they were reading. Right. Now, garden. See all these pictures? These are just some of the things they grew. the amount of stuff that they had in their garden at Crossroads, they had flowers, they had vegetables of all kinds, they had an orchard, they had lawns, they had tennis courts, they were grass lawn tennis courts, and they were always very, very, very busy. Being a day of almost continuous sunshine and quite mild, I was able to enjoy myself in the garden and have now come to the end of the usable material in my muck heap, or at least that which was rotten down sufficiently, and then amused myself digging over the ground which I hope to use for runner beans. I think that this part of the garden must have been used by Halls as a general deposit for old iron. That's what makes me think Halls might have lived here at some stage. I unearthed 4 dog chains, an old pair of strap hinges about 2 foot long, a bit of a syringe, I'm thinking that must be some sort of pump, and sundry other tins and old iron domestic appliances, a fine game, and finished up by waging war on nettles and huge tufts of coarse grass, a back-aching job, but the appearance justifies the labour. So they really are very much into their garden, and they kept it immaculate. They weeded the drive all the time, so there was nothing on the driveway. They kept the hedges in order, the grass was done regularly, and a lot of the flowers they grew were cut flowers, and they supplied the church with flowers for the church during the war. Right. The WI, I don't know whether there's anybody in the WI here. You wouldn't believe it. We had a very interesting afternoon at the WI when Mr., and I couldn't get the name, gave an account of some of his companions as prisoners of war in Germany for 3.5 years. He originally weighed 13 stone and is now just over 6. The next meeting there is to be a film and a talk on Poland by a Polish lady. So they're keeping, the WI are keeping going. A terrible thing is happening to the Ludham WI, for it is now being run by foreigners and evacuees. This was said to me in all seriousness, and I was rather surprised. This is Mrs. Goody speaking. So there is a fraction within the village that actually doesn't like incomers very much.
Question, not a question. What is the radius of incomers? 10 miles?
Yes, well. So there we go. Right, so there's another bit here. Great excitement over the way today. This is at Brayside, the White House. The annual Women's Institute Outdoor Do is to take place over there today. Madge and Sally, that's Madge and Sally Mattock, who are living there, have been extensively weeding, cutting the lawn and rolling the path. It's a great heavy roller and is too much for Sally nowadays. I think Sally and Madge are their age group, they're sort of 70, early 70s, I think here. Now I couldn't find Madge and Sally on the genealogy for the Mattock family. So I don't know what the connection is.
The Mattocks were at Laurel's Farm.
Yeah, yeah.
And that they came here from the northeast, I think.
Yeah. This is an older generation, if they're in their 70s.
They may be in the original lot, I don't know.
Yeah, don't know. But they were definitely over at Brayside, because I went in and spoke, it's Tracy that lives there now, I think, and she knows that Mattocks lived in that house. Em cut up a bunch of sandwiches this morning to take over. I should say that the garden party over the road was a big success, judging by the amount of noise. A portable wireless also added to the noises. Em got back home just before 6 and we were able to have tea and news. They listen to the news avidly. They have news at 9 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the evening, 9 o'clock and 12 o'clock. Those are all the news bulletins and they listen to at least 2 of them during the day. Right. Now these are some of the things that Mrs. Mattox got involved with. And Emma's packed up the Merchant Navy stuff and it fills the paper sack that the wool came in, and my first job after breakfast was to get the bundle to the post office in time for the morning collection. Not a very heavy job, it weighed £6, but an awkward thing to carry, so I put it on my shoulder. So we are knitting things for the Merchant Navy there. Em has 16 knitters now and only 4 ounces of wool in reserve. Miss Dutton has sent me 7.5 pounds of grey wool, 3 for sweaters, 3 for scarves, mitts, etc., and 1.5 pounds for socks. On the strength of that, I roped in another knitter, Mrs. Filippo. Oh, that's a name that we know as well. The War Savings Group has increased by 22 since the end of the year, including 8 land girls from Ludham Hall who started on Saturday. So she's involved in that as well and keeping tabs of the money coming in. Wasn't it kind of Mrs. Mattox to come along, and they are lovely eggs she brought, all laid on Monday, she said, and she told me not to go without. She could always manage to spare a few now that the birds have started to lay again. It's a long time since I've had so many eggs in the place. That Mrs. Mattox is the one at the farm, I would imagine, not from Braeside. There was a whist drive in aid of the Comforts funding last Tuesday, and they raised £26. Various things were raffled or auctioned, and a chicken was sold for £5. So that was a lot of money in those days. Yeah. A live chicken. Well, there. Right. This is the last one, and I think it's really. I had to put it in. What do you think of the budget? The cost of living looks like going up, but the increase in wages looks like being partly liquidated at least, and the subsidy fund relieved a part of its burden, an artful alternative to putting an extra taxation. What tricks there are in finance. Things were going on in the war. Like they are today, I think. So that actually rounds it off, but I want to finish with this last one, and this is really to make a big plea for you to use the Ludham Archive website. It has so much in it. Photographs, Ludham family trees, lots of interesting stuff, memories, meetings. There's a tour of Ludham Village in words and pictures. There are archived videos for you to look at. The 20th century Ludham book is there. There are downloads. All you've got to do is Google that and you'll get into the Ludham Archive website, and it will open up a whole world of Ludham to you. And if you've got any queries, enquiries at ludhamarchive.org.uk, which actually goes to Nigel.
Yeah, thanks.
Or come back at the next meeting and put your questions to him.
You need to take that extra C out as well, it won't work.
Where? Oh yes, we didn't notice that. There.
It's just our
Do you know
archive will do it now.
how many times I've gone through this to make sure
Notice that, do you? If you don't do that, it won't
Very
be what
quickly.
it says.
Yeah.
So really,
Ah,
if you are on, do go have the internet, do look at the website, because Nigel has put so much work into putting stuff on the website, and it's all very interesting stuff. Just, you know, have a look at it every
Instant
so
correction.
often. Right, that is it from me.
Oh, thank
Oh,
you.
that's good.